My daughter sold my late wife's engagement ring. She had no idea what I'd do next. Those words sound like something you'd hear in a dramatic story or whispered rumor, but they're my reality. The pain that grips my chest even now isn't just because of the loss of my wife, but because of the betrayal that came after. Before you judge me, before you judge her, let me take you back to the beginning of this chapter of my life when that ring was still safe in my possession, gleaming like the last heartbeat of the woman I loved. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The night was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every tick of the clock. I sat alone in the living room, the lamplight dim, a cup of cold coffee resting untouched beside me. In my hands, I held the engagement ring. It was simple yet elegant, a white gold band with a diamond that caught the light in ways that never ceased to amaze me. That ring had once rested on my wife's hand, and with it came an entire story. Our first kiss in the rain, our promise to build a life together, our whispered dreams of a family. She was gone now. Cancer had taken her from me far too early, ripping through our plans and leaving me with an empty house that still carried her laughter in the walls. The ring was the last thing I had of her that wasn't just a memory. It wasn't about the gold or the diamond, it was about the life we had built together. Every night, I would sit in that same chair, holding it, whispering words to her, telling her about my day, about our daughter, about how much I still missed her. I knew people thought it was strange. My daughter had even told me once, "Dad, maybe you should put it away, try to move on." But how do you move on from your heart, from your other half? That ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a tether between me and her, a sacred link I refused to let go. Sometimes, when I held it long enough, I could almost feel her hand again, warm, soft, reassuring. I would close my eyes and remember the day I slipped it onto her finger, my voice shaking as I asked her to marry me. She had laughed, not at me, but out of pure joy, her eyes sparkling brighter than the diamond itself. That memory kept me alive in the darkest of nights. I thought the ring was safe. I thought it would always stay with me, as untouchable as the love it represented. I had no idea then that someone I trusted with my very life, someone born of that very love, would one day betray it. This was the beginning of a story I never wanted to tell. But now, I must. Her name is Emily, my only daughter, the very center of my world after her mother passed away. And at 23 years old, she was at that delicate stage of life where youth still clung to her, but adulthood's burdens pressed heavily on her shoulders. To anyone on the outside, she seemed like a kind and thoughtful young woman who carried her mother's soft eyes and smile, someone who would never deliberately bring harm to her family. She called me often, visited when she could, and whenever she stepped into the house, she would greet me with a kiss on the cheek and ask if I had eaten. Small gestures that warmed the emptiness inside me, but underneath that surface warmth I could see cracks beginning to spread. She struggled with money in ways that made me worried, though she tried to hide it behind cheerful tones and dismissive laughter. Credit card bills stacked up for her, rent payments lagged behind, and I knew she was working shifts at a local cafe, but spending more than she earned. She wanted so badly to keep up with friends who flaunted their new cars, designer bags, and constant weekend trips, and though I advised her to live within her means, she would brush it aside with, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll figure it out." Still, I knew better. I had been young once, but I had also been poor, and I recognized desperation when I saw it in her eyes. At times, she would sit across from me at the dinner table, swirling the fork around her plate, forcing a smile as she told me everything was fine, yet her phone would buzz constantly with messages from friends, from people who clearly mattered more than the food in front of her. I noticed the way she avoided talking about her bank account, the way she hesitated when bills arrived, and the way her laughter sometimes felt hollow, as though she was trying to keep me from probing deeper. Still, she was my daughter, my flesh and blood, and after losing my wife, Emily was the only person I had left in this world. I tried to be patient. I tried to offer guidance, even small amounts of financial help whenever I could, but I also wanted her to learn responsibility. I thought she appreciated the sacrifices I made, that she understood how much I gave just to make sure she didn't feel alone. In those moments, when she hugged me and said, "Thank you, Dad, for always being here," I believed her sincerity. I believed that despite her struggles, she was still caring, still holding on to the values her mother had instilled in her. That belief, that blind faith in her goodness, was what made what came next all the more devastating. For even in those tender smiles and affectionate gestures, a shadow of temptation already lingered, and I had no idea how far she would let it drag her. The engagement ring was more than a piece of jewelry to me. It was the vessel that carried an entire love story. The kind of love that people spend their entire lives searching for and sometimes never find. And whenever I looked at it, I was transported back to the moment everything began. I can still see the nervous tremble in my hands as I held it out to her, the way the city lights reflected off the diamond as if the universe itself was blessing our union, and I can still hear her laughter as she covered her mouth with surprise before saying yes, with tears streaming down her face. That single piece of gold held not just a diamond, but every memory we created together, from our first apartment with peeling paint and leaky faucets where we laughed through the struggle, to the nights we stayed up planning a future that seemed endless, to the day Emily was born and she squeezed my hand tighter than ever before, the ring glittering under the hospital lights as if reminding us of the promise we made to face life together. Even after cancer stole her breath, after the house grew silent and the bed felt colder than ice, that ring remained a living testament that she had existed, that she had loved me, that I had loved her in return. To others it might have seemed small, a modest ring compared to the extravagant stones people flaunt today. But to me, it was worth more than kingdoms, more than money, more than anything anyone could measure with currency, because it was the last bridge between the world of the living and the memory of the woman who gave my life meaning. Every time I held it, I remembered her voice calling me stubborn in that affectionate tone, remembered the way she would reach across the table to hold my hand during dinner, remembered how she smelled of jasmine perfume when she leaned on my shoulder, remembered how her eyes lit up every time she looked at Emily. That ring wasn't just a reminder of her, it was her. A fragment of her essence captured in a circle of gold, and that is why I guarded it with my very soul. I kept it in a small velvet box on my nightstand, never hidden away in some drawer, because I wanted it near me, because I needed it near me, and each night before bed I would take it out, press it against my lips, and whisper words to the empty room as though she could hear me. I knew people thought I was foolish, clinging to an object, but they could never understand the weight of what it symbolized. Losing my wife had already ripped me apart, but losing that ring would feel like losing her all over again, like severing the final thread that still bound me to her. That ring was my heart, my soul, my past, and my only bridge to the woman who had been my everything, and without it, I would be nothing. Emily began to unravel her troubles in ways that I couldn't ignore. though she tried to mask them with a casual tone, as though speaking lightly could make the weight of her problems disappear. One evening she sat across from me, her phone buzzing endlessly with notifications, her fingers nervously tapping the table as she finally sighed and said, "Dad, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." At first I thought she meant her work schedule, the long hours at the cafe, but soon it became clear she was drowning in something much deeper. Credit card bills, loan payments, rent deadlines, all of it was piling up, and she confessed that she owed money to more than one person. She spoke quickly, as if ripping the bandage off, explaining that it wasn't just the basics she was struggling with, it was the image she was desperate to maintain. Her friends were all buying expensive clothes, eating out at trendy restaurants, taking weekend trips to the beach, or even flying abroad, and she felt ashamed showing up in last season's outfit or admitting she couldn't afford to join. She told me that when she declined their invitations, they teased her, calling her cheap, making her feel like she didn't belong, and for a young woman who grew up seeing her mother dress with elegance, that sting of inadequacy dug deep. I listened as she explained how she had begun spending more than she earned just to keep up appearances, telling herself she would catch up later, but later never came. Each month the hole grew deeper. Each swipe of her card pulled her further under, and the glow of her social life dimmed into something toxic and suffocating. She cried once, her head in her hands, confessing she hated the feeling of being judged, of standing in a circle of people who pretended to be friends but measured her worth by the label on her shoes or the car she drove. I wanted to reach across the table and tell her none of that mattered, that real friends wouldn't care, that the emptiness she was trying to fill with expensive things could never be satisfied that way. But I also knew how strong the lure of that world was for someone her age. She was not a bad person, just lost, desperate to fit into a mold that didn't belong to her, desperate to feel like she was still winning at life when in truth she was barely holding on. I told her to slow down, to cut off the excess spending, to focus on her future rather than the fleeting approval of people who would abandon her at the first sign of failure, but she only nodded weakly, as though she heard me but couldn't find the strength to obey. Deep down, I feared she would look for shortcuts, that her desperation would lead her to choices that went against the values her mother and I had raised her with, choices that would one day test the very bond we shared. It was on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that passes without notice, when Emily came over to visit me at the house, smiling sweetly as she carried a small bag of groceries and told me she wanted to cook dinner for us. I welcomed her gesture, grateful for her company, thinking nothing more of it as she busied herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and humming softly to herself the same way her mother used to. I sat in the living room, flipping through an old photo album, unaware that in her mind a different plan was forming, one born from desperation and the mounting weight of her debts. She excused herself at one point, saying she needed to use the restroom, but her steps carried her toward my bedroom instead. She had been inside that room countless times over the years, and she knew exactly where I kept the ring, always on the nightstand inside its velvet box. She had asked me before why I never put it in a safe or hid it away, and I had told her honestly that I didn't want to lock away my memories, that I wanted her mother close by me every night. Perhaps in that moment, as she opened the door and stared at the familiar sight of the small box, she justified her actions with thoughts of necessity, convincing herself that her mother would have understood that I had more than enough to live on while she was drowning. Her hands trembled when she reached for it, not because she didn't know what she was doing, but because she knew exactly what it meant. She opened the box, and for a moment she just stared at the ring, the diamond glinting faintly in the dim light, and a flicker of guilt crossed her face, yet the thought of the cash it would bring pushed away hesitation. She slipped it into her pocket quickly, closed the box, and set it back as though nothing had changed. Then she walked back into the kitchen with a calm smile, asking me to taste the soup she was preparing. I had no idea in that moment that the most sacred possession of my life had been stolen by the very person I loved the most. As we ate together that evening, I noticed nothing strange, though in hindsight I would remember how she avoided my eyes whenever I talked about her mother, how she rushed to leave after dinner, hugging me a little too tightly, whispering, "I love you, Dad," with a voice that shook just slightly. I believed her, as I always did, never suspecting that hidden in her purse was the last living link to my wife, a treasure she had already decided to trade for paper bills and fleeting relief. That night when I went to bed, I reached instinctively for the velvet box and felt comfort just knowing it was there, never realizing that when I next opened it, my world would collapse all over again. The following evening, after Emily had already gone back to her apartment, I followed my usual ritual before bed, reaching for the velvet box on the nightstand with the quiet comfort of a man who has done this countless times, expecting to feel that familiar reassurance of weight in my hand. But when I opened it, my heart stopped. The ring was gone. For a moment I thought I was imagining it, that perhaps my tired eyes were playing tricks on me, or that I had moved it earlier and forgotten. I searched frantically through the drawer, under the bed, across the dresser, even retraced my steps from earlier in the day, but the truth settled over me like a storm cloud. It wasn't there. My chest grew tight, panic clawing at me, and in that instant my mind immediately went to Emily. Not because I wanted to suspect her, but because she was the only one who had been in the house, the only one who knew the importance of that ring, the only one who had been near my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, torn between disbelief and the painful clarity that my daughter had done something I never thought she was capable of. My heart argued with my head, one screaming that it had to be her, the other desperately searching for another explanation, any explanation that would preserve my trust in her. I thought perhaps I had misplaced it somehow, but I knew myself too well. I was meticulous when it came to that ring. I never left it anywhere but that box. Maybe it had fallen. Maybe it had slipped away somehow, yet no matter how hard I looked, it was gone. The suspicion burned in me, but so did silence, because the idea of confronting her without proof felt unbearable. If I accused her and I was wrong, I would break her heart and damage what little relationship we had left. If I accused her and I was right, I would shatter my own heart in ways I wasn't prepared for. So I said nothing. I closed the empty box, placed it back on the nightstand, and sat there in the dim light with tears burning in my eyes, whispering to my wife's memory, asking her what I should do. I felt her absence more than ever in that moment, because she would have known the right words. She would have known how to reach our daughter. All I had was silence, and in that silence, suspicion lingered like a poison. I told myself I would wait, that the truth always had a way of coming to light, but inside I already knew. A father knows his child, and deep in my soul I felt the sting of betrayal even as my lips refused to speak it aloud. A few days passed before I could bring myself to mention the missing ring to Emily, though every hour that went by gnawed at me with growing certainty that she had taken it. I tried to act normal during our phone calls, tried to keep my voice steady, but my mind was consumed with the absence of that sacred piece of my life. Finally, One Sunday afternoon, when she stopped by the house with her usual cheerful tone, I decided I couldn't hold it in any longer. We sat in the living room, the television playing softly in the background, and I asked her casually, though my voice betrayed the heaviness in my chest, "Emily, have you seen your mother's ring? The engagement ring I always keep on the nightstand?" For a split second, her face froze, just a flicker, but I caught it, the tiniest hesitation in her eyes, before she quickly widened them in feigned shock. "What? The ring? It's missing?" she gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth like the news had just struck her heart. She leaned closer, her voice rising with what sounded like concern. "Dad, are you sure? Maybe you misplaced it? Maybe it slipped under the bed?" She reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly, her eyes shimmering as though she shared in my pain. To anyone else, her performance would have been convincing, but I knew my daughter too well. I could see the slight tremble in her fingers, the way her breathing quickened just enough to betray the lie she was weaving. I wanted to believe her so badly, wanted to take her word as truth and erase the suspicion clawing at me, but her reaction only made my heart sink further. "I've searched everywhere," I told her quietly, watching her closely. "It's gone. I can't find it." She shook her head rapidly, her voice breaking with exaggerated sadness. "Dad, no, no, that ring meant everything to you. How could it just vanish?" She looked around the room as if the ring might suddenly appear from thin air, but her eyes darted back to me with a flicker of unease she tried to disguise as compassion. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat, pretending to accept her concern. "Maybe you're right," I murmured. "Maybe I misplaced it. I'll keep looking." She hugged me then, wrapping her arms around me tightly, whispering, "We'll find it, Dad. I promise." And for a moment I almost allowed myself to fall into her embrace, to believe in her innocence. But deep down, beneath her words, beneath her tears, I felt the hollow echo of deception. It was a strange pain, sharper than any wound I had ever felt before, to realize that the only person I had left in this world could look me in the eyes and lie so convincingly about something that cut so deep into my soul. I said nothing more, hiding my suspicion, but inside I vowed to uncover the truth. It was almost a week later when the truth finally clawed its way to the surface, not through Emily's confession, but through the careless whispers of the world around her. I was sitting alone at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolling absent-mindedly through social media when a familiar name caught my attention. One of Emily's friends had posted a picture of her, smiling widely at some bar with a glass raised high, dressed in new clothes I had never seen her wear before. The caption read, something about celebrating freedom and new beginnings. And while most fathers might have smiled at the sight of their child enjoying life, my stomach twisted because I knew Emily's financial troubles well. New clothes, nights out, bottles of champagne, none of it made sense. I would have dismissed it as a temporary splurge, but then, later that same evening, a call came from an old acquaintance of mine, a man who worked at a small pawn shop a few blocks away. He hesitated before speaking, his tone uneasy, and finally he said, "I thought you should know. Emily was here last week. She sold a ring, a white gold engagement ring with a diamond. I recognized it from the times you'd shown me. I just assumed you gave her permission, but after thinking about it, I wasn't sure." My hands went cold around the phone, my throat tightening as the words sank in. I tried to steady my voice as I asked, "Are you certain it was that ring?" And he answered without hesitation, "Yes, I am certain. I even asked her if she was sure about selling something so valuable. She just said she needed the cash fast." My vision blurred as I sat there in silence, the betrayal cutting through me sharper than any blade could. I thanked him for telling me, my voice barely a whisper, and hung up the phone with trembling hands. I didn't need to see proof, didn't need to ask further questions. The truth was undeniable. Emily had taken the one thing in this world I held dearest, the ring that symbolized the love of my life, and she had traded it away like it was nothing more than loose change. I scrolled back through her social media, every smiling picture now poisoned with the knowledge of what funded them. The makeup, the clothes, the drinks, the fake joy plastered across her face, all of it bought at the expense of my broken heart. I sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at the walls that once echoed with my wife's laughter, feeling like I had lost her all over again. To know that Emily could smile, laugh, and live so carelessly after selling something so sacred made me question everything I thought I knew about her. She had lied to my face, looked me in the eye, and pretended to share my grief while secretly carrying the weight of her theft. That night, as I sat alone with the crushing silence, I realized this was no misunderstanding, no youthful mistake. It was betrayal, pure and deliberate. When the full weight of her betrayal settled into my bones, I felt something inside me split, a tearing apart of the man who wanted to scream and rage and demand answers, and the man who knew that silence would be far more powerful than any outburst. I could have called Emily that very night. I could have driven to her apartment, thrown the door open, and demanded she explain how she could steal from me, how she could sell the last piece of her mother's love. But instead, I sat in the dark, the phone in my hand, my breath heavy and uneven, and I chose silence. It wasn't weakness, it was clarity, because in that silence my grief had space to transform, hardening into something sharper, something colder, something that looked like resolve. I felt betrayed in a way I didn't think was possible. Losing my wife had been the cruelest fate life could deliver, but at least death had been inevitable, something beyond control. This, however, was chosen. Emily had chosen greed over loyalty, lies over truth, betrayal over love. She had looked me in the eye and performed sorrow while hiding the fact that she had already pocketed the cash. That thought twisted me inside out. But I would not let her see me crumble. I would not give her the satisfaction of believing I was weak. Instead, I began to plan. A quiet plan, a deliberate plan, the kind that required patience, because true lessons are never learned in a single explosion of anger. They are etched slowly into the heart until they cannot be forgotten. I thought of all the times I had forgiven her small mistakes, all the excuses I had given when she failed to take responsibility, all the money I had handed her when she promised she would do better. This was the consequence of my mercy, of my softness, and I knew that if I wanted her to understand the depth of what she had done, I would need to strike differently this time. My grief fueled the fire, but it was betrayal that sharpened it into a weapon. I remembered my wife's face, her laughter, her unwavering loyalty, and I imagined what she would say if she knew our daughter had done this. I imagined her disappointment, imagined her sadness, and it only deepened my resolve. No, I would not shout. I would not accuse her openly. I would let her believe she had fooled me, let her think she had won, because there is no punishment more powerful than being undone by your own arrogance. As I sat in that silence, my hands clenched and unclenched, my jaw tightened until it ached, and yet my mind grew calm. Revenge was not going to be loud. It was going to be quiet, precise, and unforgettable. The morning after I resolved to remain silent, I rose with a kind of grim determination that steadied my shaking hands. I knew exactly where I needed to go. The pawn shop wasn't far, a small, unassuming place tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store, the sort of establishment people walked past every day without noticing. But to me that morning, it was the place that held the last piece of my wife. I stepped inside, the air heavy with dust and the faint scent of metal and old wood, and the man behind the counter recognized me immediately. His expression softened with guilt as he brought out the velvet tray and set it gently before me. There it was, my wife's engagement ring, gleaming under the dim light as though it had been waiting for me. My heart twisted at the sight. Relief, sorrow, and fury collided inside me all at once. I reached out slowly, my fingers brushing the cool metal, and in that moment it felt like touching her hand again, fragile but alive in memory. The pawnbroker cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. I gave her far less than it was worth. She seemed desperate. I didn't ask questions. His words burned, but I only nodded, sliding the payment across the counter without hesitation. I would have emptied every account I had to get that ring back, though the irony wasn't lost on me. I was buying back what was already mine, what should have never been taken. With the ring secure in my pocket, I walked out of the shop and into the sunlight, a strange calm settling over me. No one could take it from me again, not if I was careful. I drove home slowly, every turn of the wheel weighted with thoughts of Emily and the lie she had built. Once inside the house, I didn't return the ring to the nightstand. No, that mistake I would never repeat. Instead, I searched for a place so discreet that even Emily, with all her familiarity of the home, would never suspect. I moved books from the shelf in my study, sliding aside an old collection of novels, and there, behind them, I placed the small velvet box inside a hollow I had carved years ago during a renovation project. I sealed it carefully, stacking the books back so the space looked untouched. Standing there, I whispered to the memory of my wife, "You're safe now. She won't find you again." The house was silent, the air heavy, but in that silence I felt a renewed sense of control. Emily believed the ring was gone forever, sold and lost to strangers. That lie was her comfort, her shield against guilt. She didn't know that I had already undone her betrayal, that I had reclaimed what she had thrown away. I let her live in that false belief because it would make the lesson to come even sharper when the time was right. For now, the ring was hidden, untouchable, and I swore it would never leave my protection again. In the days that followed, I wore the mask of ignorance like a second skin, pretending not to know the truth while watching Emily with a quiet, unflinching gaze. She came around often, more than usual, carrying with her a brightness that seemed forced but convincing enough for anyone who didn't know her as well as I did. She wore new shoes, designer labels she had never been able to afford before, and even carried a handbag that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. She laughed easily, showing off her purchases without directly acknowledging them, as though hoping I would notice and ask, so she could spin some harmless story about finding them on sale or a friend giving her a gift. I said nothing, though inside my chest my heart twisted with a mix of rage and sorrow. She sat across from me on the couch one evening, scrolling through her phone and smiling to herself before showing me a picture of her and her friends out at a club, the kind of place she used to complain was too expensive. "It was such a good night, Dad," she said, her voice full of false excitement. "I really needed it after all the stress lately." I nodded, my face calm, my eyes steady, while deep inside I wanted to ask her how many drinks my wife's ring had bought, how much of her mother's love she had traded to laugh under flashing lights with people who didn't care about her. Instead, I let her talk, let her spin her stories, let her dig the hole of her own arrogance deeper with every word. It wasn't just the clothes or the nights out that betrayed her. It was the way she looked at me when I mentioned the ring, feigning worry but never too much, keeping her performance measured. "Did you ever find it?" she asked once, tilting her head with practiced innocence. "I've turned the house upside down, but no luck," I replied smoothly, watching her eyes for the flicker I had come to expect. It was there, a flash of relief quickly buried under concern. "That's awful, Dad," she said softly, reaching over to pat my hand, and I almost laughed at how skilled she had become at playing her part. She thought she had me fooled, thought her lie was still intact, and in that belief she grew careless, flaunting her purchases, flaunting her freedom, blind to the fact that every action only confirmed her guilt. I let her believe she was safe. I let her carry her mask, because I knew that the longer she pretended, the harder the fall would be when the truth finally came crashing down on her. She had betrayed me, but now it was my turn to betray her expectations, not with anger, not with shouting, but with a quiet plan that would leave her stunned. I waited for the right moment, a quiet Sunday afternoon when Emily had stopped by for coffee, her new shoes clicking across the floor as though she wanted the sound to announce her success. I sat at the table with her, stirring my cup slowly, careful not to reveal the storm that still brewed inside me. Instead, I began to weave the threads of my trap with words spoken casually, as though they carried no weight at all. "You know, Emily," I said, letting my voice drift with a sigh, "something unexpected happened this past week. I got word from the attorney that your grandfather's estate had some funds left over. Nothing massive, but enough to feel like a bit of an inheritance." I watched her eyes widen, her lips parting slightly in a mixture of surprise and curiosity. She leaned closer, pretending to sip her coffee while her thoughts raced behind her expression. I smiled faintly and continued, "It feels strange, really. After losing so much, suddenly there's this little bit of gain. I've been thinking maybe it's time to replace your mother's ring, you know? It's silly, but perhaps buying something new would ease the ache of what was lost." The words slid out as if they were nothing, but each one was calculated, meant to test her, to draw her deeper into the web. Her face stiffened, just a fraction, the kind of small reaction that most people wouldn't notice, but I had spent decades reading her like a book. "A new ring?" she repeated, her voice slightly higher, her smile too quick. "Yeah, Dad, that might be a good idea. You shouldn't cling to the past so much. Maybe moving on is the healthy thing to do." I held her gaze, giving a small nod, while inside me I felt the sting of her words. To her, it was just a ring, a trinket with a price tag, but to me, it was the last piece of my wife's heart. Still, I let the moment pass, pretending to take her advice. I leaned back in my chair and chuckled softly. "I suppose you're right. Maybe I'll even take a look at some jewelry stores this week, see what catches my eye. After all, with a little inheritance money, why not?" Her smile widened then, a flash of greed quickly hidden behind an expression of support. She tried to sound nonchalant, but I could see her thoughts turning, calculating, already wondering how much money was really involved and whether it might trickle down to her. She reached across the table, patting my hand. "That sounds great, Dad. You deserve something nice." I gave her a smile in return, a practiced one that revealed nothing of the satisfaction I felt. She thought I was moving on. She thought the past was closing behind me, but in reality, I was just opening the door to her undoing. Every word, every act was setting the stage for the moment she would realize just how far she had fallen into her own lie. The next phase of my plan unfolded quietly, without the slightest hint of fanfare, because revenge, I had decided, would taste sweeter if it came cloaked in silence. After retrieving my wife's ring and securing it in a place where Emily would never find it, I began crafting the perfect lure. I visited a small shop downtown, the kind that sold gaudy trinkets designed to look like treasures. The jeweler there laughed when I asked for the flashiest pieces that cost little more than pocket change, and I left with a velvet-lined box filled with glittering stones that shone brilliantly under the light, but were worthless in substance. Back home, I placed the fake jewelry carefully on top of my dresser, not hidden, not locked away, but displayed just enough to spark curiosity. A golden chain lay draped across the edge of the box, a faux diamond ring resting beside it, catching the afternoon sun. I positioned them exactly where Emily's wandering eyes would fall if she entered my room, exactly where temptation would whisper to her the loudest. The stage was set, and all I had to do was wait. That evening, when she came over again under the pretense of checking in on me, I made sure to leave the door to my room slightly ajar, the glint of the jewelry visible from the hallway. I sat in the living room with the newspaper spread open, feigning disinterest, though my ears strained for every sound. Emily wandered in casually, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. "Dad, I brought some groceries," she called out, placing a bag on the kitchen counter. I thanked her with a smile that masked my suspicion, and then I waited as her footsteps grew quieter. A silence stretched, filled with a tension so sharp it almost rang in my ears. Then came the faintest creak of the door, a pause, and the subtle intake of breath. She had seen it. My heart pounded, but I kept my gaze fixed on the newspaper, my fingers gripping the edge as though it were the only thing keeping me anchored. Minutes passed, or maybe just seconds, but in that space I could feel the battle playing out in her mind. She thought she had gotten away with the ring, thought she was clever enough to outmaneuver me. Now, here she stood at the edge of another choice, staring at the glittering bait I had laid out before her. When she finally reappeared, her face was bright with that practiced smile, her voice warm as she asked what I wanted for dinner. But her hands, I noticed, trembled ever so slightly, and her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Later, when she left, I went to my room, opened the box, and saw what I expected. One of the rings was gone. She had taken it as predictably as night follows day. I closed the box, my lips curling into a grim smile. The trap had been sprung, and now I had the proof I needed. The confirmation came swiftly, almost too swiftly, as though Emily's greed could not wait another moment before pushing her into another reckless decision. The morning after she had visited, I received a phone call from the very same pawn shop I had retrieved my wife's ring from days earlier. The owner, a man with a sharp eye and an even sharper memory, recognized the worthless piece she tried to pawn off. "Sir," he said cautiously, "your daughter was here again, this time with something that looked fancy, but trust me, it's costume jewelry. I thought you might want to know." I thanked him, my voice calm, though inside my chest burned with a mixture of disappointment and bitter vindication. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, the weight of the betrayal settling on me like a heavy stone. She hadn't even hesitated, hadn't paused to consider that maybe, just maybe, the jewelry might have meant something to me. No, she had seen the shine, smelled the money, and rushed straight to the same place where she had sold her mother's engagement ring. The second betrayal was not just an act of theft, it was proof of her character, or rather, the decay of it. She had chosen again, chosen the path of selfishness and deceit. I thought of her mother then, my late wife whose memory still lingered in every corner of the house. What would she think if she saw her daughter bartering away trinkets, chasing after fleeting pleasures, betraying the trust of the very man who raised her? That thought cut deeper than anything else, and I felt a wave of sorrow drown me before anger rose up to replace it. Emily returned that evening as though nothing had happened. She smiled, her arms full of cheap takeout food, chatting breezily about her day, filling the air with meaningless noise meant to distract. But I watched her carefully, every gesture, every flicker in her eyes. She had a new handbag slung over her shoulder, one that gleamed with the kind of artificial luxury she so adored, and her nails were freshly painted, the smell of polish still faintly clinging to her. She thought she was clever, thought she had once again outsmarted her grieving old father, but what she didn't realize was that she had walked directly into the net I had woven for her. That night, after she had gone, I opened the jewelry box again and stared at the empty space where the fake ring had been, my lips pressed together, my eyes closing as I let the reality sink in. There was no going back now. Her betrayal wasn't a mistake. It was a choice repeated, solidified, made with intent. She had confirmed what I had feared all along, that the girl I raised, the one I had loved and sacrificed for, had grown into a woman who valued glitter and greed more than family or honor. And so I knew the next step of my plan had to cut deeper than simple baiting. It had to teach her a lesson she would never forget. The moment of truth arrived sooner than even I had anticipated. Emily, confident in her deceit, strutted into the pawn shop, carrying the imitation jewels I had so carefully planted. She walked with the air of someone who believed she was in control, someone who thought she could manipulate the world to her desires without consequence. The jeweler, however, had been warned, and the script was already set. As she laid the glittering necklace and ring onto the counter, her voice carried the same false sweetness she often used on me. "These are from my father's collection," she said, feigning innocence. "He won't miss them, and I could use the cash." The man behind the counter examined the items with deliberate slowness, his brow furrowing as he adjusted the magnifying glass. A small smirk tugged at his lips before he placed the pieces back onto the velvet cloth and looked her straight in the eye. "Miss, I don't know what game you're playing, but these are worthless. Costume jewelry. Fake as they come." At first, she blinked, stunned, then forced a laugh, as if to cover her embarrassment. "You must be mistaken," she insisted, her tone sharp and defensive. But the jeweler only shook his head, pushing the items back toward her. "I know fakes when I see them. I've been in this business 30 years. These are worth less than a dinner at a cheap diner. Whoever told you they were valuable played you." The words hung in the air, slicing through her composure. Her cheeks flushed red, her eyes darting nervously around the shop as if the other customers had heard, as if they were mocking her too. Humiliation poured over her like icy water. The realization that she had been tricked by her own father no less was beginning to settle into her bones. Anger followed quickly on its heels. She snatched the jewelry from the counter, her hands trembling as she shoved them back into her purse. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice shaking, though whether from rage or shame, even she couldn't tell. She stormed out of the pawn shop, the bell above the door jingling mockingly, as if laughing at her failure. Outside, the cold air hit her face, and she stopped in her tracks, clutching the fake jewels tightly in her fists. A sickening realization washed over her. She hadn't just been duped by the jeweler. She had been outsmarted by the very man she thought was too blind with grief to notice her schemes. The shame of being exposed, of being seen not as clever but as a fool, stung deeper than she could bear. In that instant, she felt a fury toward me unlike any she had ever known, but buried within that fury was a small seed of fear, because now she knew I was watching. Now she knew I had seen her for who she truly was, and worse, that I had chosen to show her just how fragile her illusions of control really were. The night after her humiliating encounter at the pawn shop, Emily returned home seething, her eyes avoiding mine as she tossed her bag on the couch and disappeared into the kitchen. I remained in my chair, the same chair where I had sat countless evenings with her mother, sipping tea and talking about nothing and everything. The house was quiet except for the sound of Emily moving about, but beneath that silence was a storm I had carefully contained for weeks. It was time. When she finally sat across from me, scrolling through her phone with that same air of superiority, I leaned forward, my voice calm but carrying a weight that immediately drew her eyes. "Emily," I said slowly, "we need to talk." She sighed, already defensive, as though expecting another lecture about money. But then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, one she recognized instantly. Her face paled as I opened it and revealed the engagement ring, the very same one she had stolen and sold as though it were nothing more than a trinket. The room seemed to freeze around us. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. How do you have that?" she stammered, her voice breaking. I let the silence stretch, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, before I finally spoke, each word deliberate. "Because, Emily, I knew. I knew from the moment it was gone. I suspected you, my own daughter, and I prayed I was wrong, but I wasn't. I watched you lie to my face, watched you spend the money as though it were your right, while I held my tongue and let you dig your own grave." Her lip trembled, but she tried to recover, forcing out excuses. "Dad, I didn't mean to. I was desperate. You don't understand." "No," I cut her off sharply, my voice like steel. "You don't understand. That ring was not just jewelry. It was the last piece of your mother I had left. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the night I asked her to marry me, the way her eyes lit up, the promises we made. That ring held her love, our history, our life together. And you sold it. For cash you burned in weeks." Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to reach for the box, but I pulled it back, holding it tightly. "I got it back," I continued, "because, unlike you, I know its worth. Not in money, but in memory. And now you will never touch it again." She collapsed into silence, her eyes darting between me and the ring, realizing the depth of her betrayal laid bare in the cold light of truth. For the first time, the weight of her actions seemed to press down on her shoulders, suffocating the lies she had clung to. And I let her sit in that silence, forced to face not just her shame, but the unshakable reality that she had been exposed completely. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she leaned forward, her hands trembling, her voice breaking under the pressure of the truth she could no longer escape. "Dad, please, I'm sorry," she cried, her words tumbling over themselves in desperation. "I didn't know what else to do. I had debts, people pressuring me. I thought I could fix it all if I just had the money. I wasn't thinking about what it meant to you. I swear, I was drowning. Her voice cracked, and she slid to her knees in front of me, clutching at my hands as though physical closeness could erase the chasm she had created between us. Please forgive me. I was stupid, selfish, desperate. I'll never do it again. Her tears fell freely, wetting the back of my hand, but I remained still, my face unreadable, my heart hardened by the weeks of lies and betrayal. I studied her, this daughter I had raised, the same girl I had once carried on my shoulders, who had once clung to her mother's skirts with wide, innocent eyes, and now here she was, a young woman begging not out of remorse, but out of fear, fear of consequences, fear of losing her comfort, fear of being cut off from what I could provide. I could hear it in her tone, the hollow ring of someone who regretted being caught, not the act itself. You call it desperation, I said finally, my voice steady, each word heavy. But desperation does not sell love. Desperation does not betray family. Desperation does not lie to the face of the person who gave you life. What you did was not survival, Emily, it was greed. She shook her head frantically, her tears spilling faster, her voice rising as she tried to convince me, maybe even herself. No, it wasn't greed. I just wanted to keep up. I didn't want to look like a failure in front of my friends. I thought if I could just make things look better, then maybe. Her words stopped abruptly, the admission hanging in the air like smoke, suffocating in its truth. She had wanted appearances, approval, validation, and she had traded her mother's memory for it. I leaned back in my chair, letting her see the disappointment carved deep into my face, disappointment so sharp it cut deeper than any shouted reprimand. You see, Emily, I said softly, you're not begging me for forgiveness because you feel the weight of what you did to your mother's memory. You're begging because you lost, because you were caught, because the game ended before you could keep playing. If I hadn't retrieved this ring, if you hadn't been exposed, would you have confessed? Would you have cared? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out, only a broken sob as her body shook. She buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled and childlike. I don't know. I don't know. And in that moment, as I looked down at her, I realized the truth. Remorse had not yet touched her heart, and forgiveness would mean nothing to someone who had not learned its cost. I stood slowly, looking down at Emily as she knelt before me, her face streaked with tears, her hands clutching at the air as if she could grasp back the pieces of trust she had shattered. My voice was calm, almost eerily so, as I spoke the words that had been building in me since the moment I discovered the truth. Emily, I can no longer allow you to treat me as your safety net. You made your choices, and now you will live with them. From this day forward, you are cut off financially. No more rent paid, no more debts covered, no more bailouts when you gamble with your life. You are an adult, and you will face adulthood on your own terms. Her head snapped up, her swollen eyes wide with panic. Dad, no, you can't. Please, I'll change. I swear I'll do better. Just give me another chance. I don't need much, just enough to get back on my feet. But I shook my head, my resolve like iron. You've had chance after chance. Every lie you told me was a chance. Every tear you faked when I asked about the missing ring was a chance, and you squandered them all. I can't give you another chance to hurt me, to dishonor your mother's memory again. This is not about getting back on your feet. This is about learning that there are consequences for betrayal. She reached for me, but I stepped back, pulling my hands behind me. I've already spoken to my lawyer, I continued, my voice cold, deliberate. You are no longer part of my will. The house, the savings, The keepsakes, everything I leave behind, will go to charity, to causes your mother and I cared about. I will not reward selfishness with inheritance. You wanted money more than you wanted family, and you proved that with your actions. When I am gone, you will have only your own work, your own choices, your own strength to rely on. Her mouth fell open as though I had struck her. She shook her head violently, tears flying as she cried out, "No, no, please, you can't just erase me from your life. I'm your daughter. I made a mistake, but I'm still your blood." I let her words hang in the silence before answering. "Blood may tie us, Emily, but loyalty, love, and respect keep us bound. You severed those ties the day you sold your mother's ring and looked me in the eye while you lied. That was not a mistake, it was a choice. And choices have consequences." Her sobs filled the room, echoing against the walls like the cries of a child who had finally been denied something she thought she was entitled to. For the first time in years, I did not move to comfort her. I did not soften my tone or make promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I turned away, placing the engagement ring gently into a locked box on my desk, its weight solid and eternal in my hands, a reminder of love that could never be sold. Without looking back, I gave her my final words. "Your sentence has been passed. Live with it." That night, after the storm of her tears had faded into the silence of an empty house, I sat alone in my study with the engagement ring resting in my palm. For years it had been a fragile lifeline to the woman I loved, a shining token of the story we built together, a reminder of the promises we kept until death separated us. But now, staring at its delicate band and the stone that still caught the light the way her eyes once had, I realized the ring had transformed. It was no longer just a relic of love. It had become a vessel of two truths, the beauty of devotion and the ugliness of betrayal. My daughter's greed had scarred it, not physically, but in its meaning. I thought about the day I slipped it onto my wife's finger, the way her hands shook as she said yes, the way we laughed, because we were nervous and young, but determined to build a life that mattered. That memory still lived within this ring, untouched and pure. But beside it, layered over it, was now the memory of Emily's deception, her lies, the way she had chosen money over legacy, selfishness over family. At first, I grieved that stain, but as the hours passed, I began to see it differently. The ring had not lost its value. If anything, it had gained another dimension. It was no longer a fragile piece of the past, it was a testament, a lesson etched into metal and stone, proof that even the most beautiful things could be tested and survive. My wife would have wanted me to protect it, not just as a jewel but as a truth, and in that I felt her presence again, steadying me, reminding me that love without justice becomes weakness. Emily had forced me to confront that. I loved her as my daughter, but love does not excuse betrayal. She had been given every opportunity to honor her mother's memory, to respect what we built, and she chose instead to desecrate it. By reclaiming the ring and setting boundaries, I had done what I should have done long ago. I had drawn a line between grace and folly. The ring gleamed softly under the lamplight, and I whispered to it as though speaking to my wife, "You're still ours. They can't take you. They can't destroy what you mean." And then, after a long silence, I added, "You're not just a symbol of her love anymore. You're a symbol of justice." In that moment, I felt lighter. The grief I carried was still there, but it had sharpened into strength, the kind of strength that comes from standing firm. The engagement ring was more than jewelry, more than memory. It was truth embodied. I locked it away again, not because I feared losing it, but because I finally understood its new purpose. Whenever I looked at it in the years to come, I would remember two things: the unbreakable love I shared with my wife, and the hard but necessary justice I had delivered when betrayal tried to destroy it. The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls and settled in the corners of the house like an unspoken truth. I sat alone, the engagement ring glimmering faintly in my hand, its light dancing with the lamplight as though alive. I traced the band with my thumb, remembering the warmth of the hand that once wore it, the laughter of the woman who carried my heart until her last breath. It was strange how something so small could hold a lifetime, how one circle of metal and stone could bear the weight of promises, dreams, and the kind of love that never dies. Yet now, layered over that love, was the shadow of betrayal. My daughter had tried to strip it from me, had tried to turn a sacred memory into cash for fleeting pleasures, and though I retrieved it, though it was safe again, it would forever bear the mark of what she did. But as I looked at it, I realized it was stronger now, tested, tried, enduring. This ring had survived love, death, theft, and return. It was no longer fragile, it was indestructible, just like the bond between my wife and me. Slowly, carefully, I rose and carried it to the safe I had prepared, hidden in a place my daughter would never discover. The metal door groaned softly as I opened it, revealing the velvet box waiting like a sanctuary. I placed the ring inside, closing the lid with reverence, as though I were tucking away my wife's memory itself. My hand lingered there for a moment, trembling not from weakness but from the weight of all that had happened. I leaned closer, the words forming on my lips before I even thought them. "Don't worry, love," I whispered, my voice breaking into the silence. "She'll never touch you again." The words hung in the air, heavy and final, as though carried to the other side where my wife rested. I closed the safe with a click that echoed like a verdict, sealing not just the ring but the chapter that had nearly desecrated it. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the stillness, feeling both the ache of loss and the satisfaction of justice. My daughter's face flickered in my mind, her tears, her pleas, her selfishness, and I let the image fade. She had made her choice. I had made mine. The ring was safe, the memory protected, the love preserved. Nothing could change that now. Turning off the lamp, I let the room fall into darkness, but in my mind the ring still shone, eternal, untouchable, unbroken. Your time means a lot. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.